The burning sands, the desert was endless. Heat waves danced over the sand, making the air look like it was melting. Ethan walked slowly, his boots sinking into the soft ground with every heavy step. His water bottle was almost empty, and his backpack felt heavier than ever. But he had no choice. This planet was harsh, but it was the only home he had left. Ethan was a scavenger, always searching for old parts from crashed ships. Sometimes he found something valuable. Most times he found nothing but sand and silence. Today felt like every other day, until he saw something strange on the horizon. At first, it was just a small, dark spot. Maybe a rock, he thought. But as he walked closer, the shape became clearer. It was a body. Ethan stopped, his heart beating faster. Out here, bodies meant danger. Sometimes they meant a trap, or maybe someone was just unlucky. Ethan almost turned away. He knew he should not get involved. But as he looked again, something inside him changed. Maybe it was loneliness, or maybe it was hope. He stepped forward, carefully. As he got closer, he realized it was not a human. The figure was small and slim, with strange bluish skin that shimmered in the sunlight. The creature wore a torn suit, probably from a crashed ship. Ethan's eyes widened. An alien here? He had only heard stories about them, some friendly, some not. The alien was alive, barely. She was lying face down in the sand, her breath coming in short, weak gasps. One hand was stretched forward, like she had tried to crawl. Ethan dropped to his knees and gently rolled her over. The alien girl's eyes fluttered open. They were large, bright, and full of fear. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Instead, a small, broken sound escaped her throat. Ethan knew she would die in minutes if he left her here. The sun was too hot, and the desert was unforgiving. He hesitated. Helping her could bring trouble. Maybe others were looking for her. Maybe she was dangerous. But Ethan could not leave her to die. He remembered the times when he needed help, and nobody was there. He took off his backpack and pulled out his last bottle of water. Slowly, he poured a few drops onto her lips. She coughed, but then swallowed, her eyes never leaving his face. Her breathing grew a little stronger. "It's okay," Ethan said softly. He was not sure if she understood, but he tried to smile. The alien girl shivered, her skin burning hot to the touch. He needed to get her out of the sun. Now. Ethan looked around. His shelter was not far, hidden behind some tall rocks. It was a small place made from old ship parts, but it was safe. He picked her up carefully. She was lighter than he expected, almost as if she weighed nothing at all. As he carried her, her hand weakly clung to his arm. The walk back felt much longer with the extra weight. Every few steps, Ethan had to stop and catch his breath. The sun seemed to burn hotter, and sweat rolled down his face. But he did not give up. He whispered small words of comfort, hoping she could feel that he was not her enemy. When they finally reached the shelter, Ethan pushed open the metal door and carried her inside. The air was cool and dark, a welcome change from the burning desert. He placed her on his small bed and gave her more water, just a sip at a time. She watched him with wide, scared eyes. Her hands trembled as she clutched the blanket he offered. Ethan could see cuts on her face and arms. He found his small medical kit and cleaned her wounds as gently as he could. As the hours passed, the alien girl's breathing slowed and became deeper. She closed her eyes, drifting into an uneasy sleep. Ethan sat beside her, listening to the quiet hum of the shelter's cooling fan. Outside, the wind howled, blowing sand against the metal walls. Ethan looked at the alien girl and wondered who she was. Why was she alone in the desert? Who had hurt her? Was she running from someone or something? He wanted to ask, but for now he just watched over her. He knew he had made a risky choice by saving her. But deep inside, he felt he had done the right thing. For the first time in a long time, Ethan was not alone. He looked out the small window. At the endless sand, not knowing that his life was about to change forever. The desert was silent again, but Ethan's mind was full of questions. The only thing he knew for sure was that this was just the beginning. Stranger in the shelter night fell quickly in the desert, and the world outside turned cold and quiet. Ethan sat near the alien girl, his mind racing with worry and curiosity. The only sounds in his small shelter were the soft hum of an old generator and the shallow breaths of his strange guest. Ethan watched her sleep, his eyes tracing the odd lines and patterns on her blue skin. The wounds on her face were healing, but slowly. He wondered where she had come from and if anyone was coming for her. He knew nothing about her, not even her name. But in this lonely world, she was now his responsibility. Suddenly, the girl stirred. She woke with a small gasp, eyes darting around the shadowy room. When she saw Ethan, she shrank back against the wall, pulling the blanket tight around her. Ethan raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's okay. You're safe here," he said softly. The girl didn't answer. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she pressed herself even further into the corner. She began to whisper words in a strange, musical language. Ethan could not understand, but he could feel the worry in her voice. He tried again, more slowly. "You are safe. No one will hurt you here." She stared at him, breathing hard. Carefully, Ethan set a small bowl of water and a piece of bread near her. He took a few steps back and sat down, trying not to look threatening. She hesitated, then reached for the water. Her hands shook as she drank. She looked at the bread for a long moment, as if unsure it was real food, then took a small bite. She chewed slowly, eyes never leaving Ethan. Ethan watched quietly. He had always been alone. Other scavengers never stayed long, and he liked it that way. But now he was responsible for someone else. Someone who didn't even look human. After a while, she set down the bowl. She pointed to herself and tried to speak. "Lyra," she whispered. Ethan nodded and smiled gently. "Lyra? Is that your name?" She nodded slowly, repeating, "Lyra." Ethan touched his chest. "Ethan." She looked at him, her eyes softening just a little. "Then," she said, trying to copy the sound. They sat in silence, two strangers, with nothing in common but this tiny shelter. But Ethan felt something change. The fear in Lyra's eyes faded just a little, replaced by something like hope. As the night grew colder, Ethan gave her a thicker blanket and pointed to a small heater in the corner. He showed her how to turn it on, and warm air began to fill the room. Lyra smiled for the first time, a small, quick smile, gone in a moment. Later, Ethan heard a strange noise outside. He crept to the door and peered into the night. Far off, a light flashed across the dunes, moving in slow, careful lines. Not a star, not lightning. Someone was out there, searching the desert. Ethan felt a cold fear in his stomach. Was someone looking for Lyra? He quietly locked the door and pulled a heavy box in front of it. Then he dimmed the lights inside, hoping the shelter would look empty from outside. Lyra watched him, understanding his fear. She drew a shape in the dust with her finger, a triangle inside a circle. She pointed to herself, then to the door, and then to Ethan. He understood. Whoever was out there, they were dangerous, and they were looking for her. Ethan nodded. He picked up his old rifle, just in case, and sat near the door all night, listening for footsteps. Lyra curled up on the bed, shivering. In the dim light, she looked small and fragile. Outside, the searchlight moved back and forth, searching the sand. It came closer, and Ethan held his breath. He could hear voices, rough and sharp, speaking in a language he didn't know. Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, hugging the blanket close. The light stopped just outside the shelter. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He held the rifle tight, ready to protect this girl he barely knew. But after a long, tense moment, the voices faded. The light moved away, and silence returned. Ethan let out a shaky breath. He looked at Lyra, who was watching him with wide eyes. He nodded, trying to smile. "You're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you." Lyra looked at him, her fear melting into gratitude. She whispered something in her own language, and Ethan wished he could understand that in the lonely desert night. Two strangers began to trust each other. Ethan didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he was no longer alone. And for the first time in a long while, he was ready to face whatever dangers waited in the burning sands. The silent hunt dawn brought a sharp chill, and the wind sent fine sand rattling against the shelter's metal walls. Ethan hadn't slept all night. He kept watch by the door, clutching his old rifle, his eyes heavy but alert. Inside, Lyra slept. Lightly, curled up under layers of blankets, her breathing soft and quick. As the first pale sunlight crept across the desert, Ethan crept outside to check for danger. The sand was cold under his boots. He circled his shelter slowly, every sense alert. That's when he noticed something strange: footprints. There were 3 sets, big, heavy boots, not his own. They circled his shelter, stopping by the door, then disappearing back into the dunes. Someone had come close, very close, in the dark while he and Lyra hid inside. Ethan's heart pounded. Whoever they were, they hadn't found the entrance. But they would probably come back. He hurried back inside and locked the door, then knelt beside Lyra, shaking her awake gently. She blinked up at him, confused. Ethan pointed to the door, then traced the shape of a boot in the dust. Lyra understood at once. She sat up quickly, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to hide," Ethan whispered. Lyra nodded. Her hand trembled. As she reached for her pack, a small silver pouch hidden inside the blanket. She pulled out a flat metal disc and handed it to Ethan. He looked at it, confused. Lyra mimed pushing it into the wall. Ethan pressed the disc against the shelter's inside wall. At once, a soft blue shimmer covered the metal, some kind of alien camouflage. From outside, the shelter would look like a pile of rocks. Ethan was amazed, but there was no time for questions. He and Lyra moved quickly, stuffing blankets and supplies into a bag. Lyra drew a line in the dust, 3 stick figures with long guns, one with a sharp arrow pointing to Ethan and Lyra. "Hunters," she whispered in a broken voice. Ethan's skin prickled. "Hunters here, looking for Lyra and maybe willing to kill anyone who helped her." He felt a surge of protectiveness. He nodded to Lyra, grabbed the bag, and led her to the back of the shelter. There, he pulled up a trapdoor hidden under a crate. "Come on," he said. Lyra hesitated, then climbed down into the small, dark crawl space beneath the floor. Ethan followed, pulling the crate back over the trapdoor. They crouched in the darkness, listening to the wind howl outside. Ethan's mind raced. How long would they have to hide? Would the camouflage fool the hunters? After what felt like hours, heavy footsteps crunched on the sand above them. Through a thin crack, Ethan saw shadows move past the shelter. Harsh voices spoke in a language he didn't know, but one word stood out, repeated again and again: Lyra. Ethan's heart thundered in his chest. Lyra pressed her hands over her mouth to keep from crying out. He wanted to comfort her, but dared not move. The footsteps circled the shelter. Someone banged on the metal door, making it shake. Then came silence. The shadows faded. For a long time, Ethan and Lyra did not dare to breathe. Finally, the footsteps. And voices moved away, swallowed by the endless dunes. The sun rose higher, and the heat inside the crawl space became unbearable. Sweat rolled down Ethan's face. Lyra trembled beside him when it was quiet again. Ethan carefully pushed open the trapdoor and crawled out, helping Lyra up after him. The shelter was untouched, but outside, the sand was full of boot prints. Someone had left a black mark on the door, a warning, or maybe a message. Ethan studied it, frowning. Lyra stared at the symbol and whispered, "Danger." Ethan knew they couldn't stay. The hunters would come back, and next time, they might find the hidden entrance. He needed a plan. That evening, as the desert cooled, Ethan gathered supplies, food, water, and the little alien tech Lyra had shared with him. Lyra traced a rough map in the dust, showing mountains, old shipwrecks, and a narrow canyon. She pointed to the canyon and made a running motion with her hands. "Hide there?" Ethan guessed. Lyra nodded. She looked up at him, her eyes full of trust. Before leaving, Ethan camouflaged the shelter one last time, hoping to slow down anyone chasing them. With Lyra beside him, he stepped out into the dying light, footprints trailing behind them in the fire. As night fell, they walked together toward the canyon, leaving the only home Ethan had ever known. Every sound made him tense, every shadow looked like danger. But he kept moving, guided by hope and the promise that he wouldn't let Lyra face her hunters alone. The silent hunt had begun. And in the vast desert, Ethan and Lyra were now prey, but they were not giving up. Secrets in the sand, as the desert wind howled around them. Ethan and Lyra hurried across the dunes, always looking back, always listening for the hunter's return. They moved mostly at night, following the rough map Lyra had drawn in the sand. Ethan trusted her sense of direction. Her people must have crossed these wastelands before. One night, after hours of walking, they reached the edge of a dry riverbed. The sand here was cooler, almost white under the moonlight. They found shelter behind a wall of rocks, hidden from the open desert. Exhausted, they dropped their bags and sat close together, listening to the silence. Lyra looked up at the sky, her strange blue eyes reflecting the stars. She started humming softly a song in her language. Ethan listened quietly, comforted by the gentle sound. He realized he had never heard a song from another world before. When her song ended, Lyra pointed to the stars, drawing lines in the air. Between them, she said a few words in her language, then tried English. "My home, far, very far." She drew a little circle in the sand. "I come ... here, crash." Ethan nodded, understanding. He pointed at himself and grinned. "Earth. Far, too." Lyra smiled a little, then looked down, her face growing serious. Suddenly, she dug her hands into the sand and pulled out a small, glowing stone, a crystal, shining faintly in the dark. She held it out to Ethan, her hands shaking. "For you. Hide." Her words were soft but urgent. Ethan took the crystal. It felt cool, and strange colors danced inside it. He looked at Lyra, confused. She struggled for words. "Bad people want this. Hurt me. Hurt you. Please hide." Ethan hid the crystal in his backpack, under a layer of clothes. He looked around, but there was no one nearby, just the whisper of wind and the empty desert. "Why do they want it?" he asked gently. Lyra frowned, trying to find the right words. Crystal, power, save or destroy. She pressed her palms together, then pulled them apart, as if showing something powerful and dangerous. Ethan shivered. He had never seen alien technology up close before. He suddenly understood why the hunters wanted Lyra. It wasn't just about her. It was about this crystal. He put a comforting hand on Lyra's shoulder. "We'll keep it safe," he promised. As dawn neared, Ethan and Lyra shared a simple meal. They spoke little, but trust had begun to grow between them. Lyra used her alien medical kit to clean Ethan's old wounds, using a gel that cooled his skin and healed the cuts faster than anything he'd ever used. Ethan showed her how to use his desert survival tools, how to filter water from the air, how to find shelter from sandstorms. For a moment, the world outside faded. They were just two travelers helping each other, but the peace didn't last. As the sun rose, Ethan spotted movement on the far side of the riverbed, figures at least 3, moving slowly but steadily. He grabbed his binoculars and looked. The hunters had found their trail. Ethan and Lyra quickly packed up. They moved up the riverbed, hiding their tracks with a brush. But the hunters were skilled. They followed every mark in the sand. Just when Ethan thought they would be caught, Lyra stopped and pointed to a small opening in the rock wall. "There," she whispered. "It was a narrow cave, just big enough for them to slip inside." Inside it was cool and dark. Ethan and Lyra crawled deeper, their hands brushing against old carvings in the stone, strange symbols left by someone long ago. The air smelled of dust and secrets. As they waited in the darkness, Ethan noticed Lyra holding her side in pain. He turned on his small flashlight. Blood soaked her suit where an old wound had reopened. Lyra tried to hide it, but Ethan saw the fear in her eyes. Without hesitation, Ethan tore a strip from his shirt and tied it around her waist, pressing gently to stop the bleeding. Lyra squeezed his hand, tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Outside, they heard the hunters' voices growing closer. The cave was their only hope. Ethan turned off the light. Together, he and Lyra sat quietly, listening to footsteps crunching the sand above. The crystal in Ethan's backpack glowed softly, hidden from the world, holding a secret that could change everything. Deep inside the cave, Ethan made a silent promise. He would not let anything happen to Lyra, not now, not ever. As the hunters searched above, Lyra leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. In that dark place, surrounded by secrets and danger, two strangers became something closer, friends bound by survival and hope. And as the sun rose over the desert, the real journey had only just begun. The escape plan inside the narrow cave, Ethan and Lyra waited for hours. The air grew heavy, every sound from outside echoing through the stone like a warning. Ethan kept his hand close to his backpack, feeling the shape of the crystal hidden. Inside, Lyra's breathing was shallow, her face pale from blood loss, but she kept silent and strong. Outside, voices called to each other in a harsh, guttural language. Flashlights swept across the rocks. The hunters were searching every crack and shadow. Ethan's heart thudded. He pressed his back against the cold stone and mouthed the word, "Quiet." Then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the hunters moved on. Their voices faded, footsteps growing distant. For a long time, Ethan and Lyra didn't move, afraid to even breathe. Finally, Lyra gave a small nod. They were safe for now. As soon as it was quiet, Ethan pulled out a small map he had made on old paper scraps. He spread it on the stone floor and shined his flashlight over it. "We can't stay here," he whispered. "They'll come back." Lyra leaned closer, her eyes searching the map. She tapped a spot shaped like a broken star, the old mining tunnels. "Hide, safe," she whispered, her voice weak but determined. Ethan studied the path. The mining tunnels were dangerous, abandoned long ago after a cave-in. But if they could reach them, maybe they could lose the hunters. He glanced at Lyra's wound, worry tightening his jaw. "Can you walk?" Lyra nodded, though her hands trembled. She pulled out her silver pouch and found a small vial. She poured some blue liquid onto her wound. It hissed, glowing, and the bleeding slowed. Ethan watched in awe as her skin began to heal faster. Right before his eyes, outside, the first light of morning slipped into the cave. They packed up quickly. Ethan helped Lyra to her feet, wrapping an arm around her shoulders for support. Together, they climbed out of the cave and hurried along the shadowy side of the riverbed. As they walked, Lyra tried to teach Ethan a few words from her language. Run sounded like Shara. Hide was Milo. She pointed to the crystal, saying, "Vita life. Bad people want Vita." Ethan repeated the words, committing them to memory. He handed her a water pouch, and for the first time, she managed a small, grateful smile. Soon, they reached the abandoned mining site. A rusted metal tower, half buried in the sand, marked the entrance. Ethan looked around for danger, then led Lyra down a sloping path into the darkness. Inside, the air was cool but thick with dust. Their footsteps echoed as they passed piles of broken equipment and collapsed tunnels. Ethan moved slowly, watching every shadow. While Lyra leaned on him for support, they stopped in a wide chamber filled with old mining carts. Ethan found a heavy wrench for protection and searched for an escape route. On a dusty control panel, Lyra pressed buttons and lights flickered to life. A faint hum ran through the walls. Suddenly, a loud sound echoed through the tunnels. The hunters had found the entrance. They heard boots pounding above, voices shouting, and beams of light swinging wildly through the darkness. Ethan and Lyra hid behind a pile of metal crates. Holding their breath, the hunters split up, searching every tunnel. Lyra reached into her pouch and handed Ethan a tiny device. "Press," she whispered, showing him how. Ethan waited until one hunter came close, then pressed the device. Instantly, a flash of light blinded the man, who cried out and stumbled back. Ethan pulled Lyra through a narrow side tunnel, running. As fast as they could. The chase was on. They ducked through tight spaces, crawling and dodging falling stones. Ethan used his wrench to block a door behind them, buying precious seconds. The tunnels twisted and turned, and the hunters' voices echoed all around them. Finally, Lyra spotted an old lift at the far end of a shaft. She limped toward it, and Ethan helped her inside. He slammed the gate shut and pressed the only working button. The lift groaned, then began to rise. Below, the hunters burst into the shaft, firing energy blasts that lit up the darkness. Ethan shielded Lyra as the lift rattled upward. Sparks flew. The cable snapped and the lift jerked to a stop just short of the top. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then Ethan saw a narrow hatch above. "Up there," he shouted. He climbed through first, then helped Lyra up. Just as the hunters fired at the lift, the two of them crawled through the hatch and rolled onto the sunlit sand above, breathless and bruised. They lay in the open, blinking at the bright sky. The hunters' shouts echoed far below, but Ethan and Lyra were safe, at least for now. As they caught their breath, Lyra pressed the crystal into Ethan's hand. "Vita's safe because of you," she whispered. Ethan smiled. They had escaped together, and the desert was wide and full of new dangers. But for the first time, Ethan felt hope. They had a plan, and they still had each other. The last stand. The desert wind was harsh, blowing grit into Ethan's eyes as he and Lyra crawled away from the broken lift. Both were exhausted, their hands scraped and skin burned, but they kept moving. Behind them, the angry shouts of hunters echoed from deep inside the mines, growing fainter with every step. When they finally reached the cover of a rocky hill, Ethan dropped to his knees, breathing hard. Lyra slumped beside him, clutching the precious crystal in both hands. The morning sun beat down, promising another blazing day. "We can't run forever," Ethan said, his voice rough and tired. Lyra nodded. "They not stop, Vita. Too strong, too important." Ethan looked at her, then at the horizon. The mines were behind them, but the hunters were not far. He saw the glint of binoculars in the distance. Already, their enemies were climbing out of the tunnels, looking for fresh tracks. For the first time, Ethan felt truly afraid. He was used to surviving alone, hiding, running from danger. But now he was responsible for more than just himself. Lyra was wounded and weak, and the crystal she carried was a beacon for every greedy eye on the planet. He took a deep breath and forced himself to think. They needed a plan, something bold, something unexpected. An idea sparked in his mind. Nearby, at the edge of the rocky hills, stood the remains of an old survey station, a small round building with a steel door and shattered windows. Ethan had scavenged there before. He remembered broken machinery, empty fuel tanks, and a network of deep cracks under the floor. "Come on," he said, helping Lyra to her feet. "One last chance." Moving quickly, they hurried to the station and slipped inside. The place was dusty and dark, the floor covered in broken glass, but it was shelter. Ethan locked the steel door and stacked crates against it. Then he found an old comms unit and pressed buttons, hoping for a miracle. Static buzzed, but there was no signal, no rescue coming. Lyra sat against the wall, shivering despite the heat. Ethan knelt beside her and gently bandaged her wounds. She smiled at him, tired but trusting. "Ethan, friend." Her words warmed his heart. "I promise to protect you," he whispered, "and I will." He got to work, using every tool and scrap he could find. He set traps near the windows, tripwires made from wires and broken bottles, noisemakers from old cans. He placed the crystal deep under the floor, hidden in the network of cracks, and then covered it with heavy crates. Outside, the hunters grew closer. Ethan saw their shadows moving across the sand. Their leader, a tall figure in silver armor, stood at the front, barking orders in a harsh language. They surrounded the station, weapons raised. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped to the window, rifle in hand. "We don't have what you want," he shouted, trying to sound strong. The leader laughed, a cold, metallic sound. "Lyra, come out." "And the human lives," he threatened in broken English. Inside, Lyra shook her head. "They not let you live," she whispered. "Never trust." Ethan nodded. He looked at the traps and then at Lyra. "Stay low. Don't move unless I say." The attack began. The hunters fired at the station, bullets and energy blasts smashing into the walls. Ethan ducked behind a crate as glass shattered above his head. He aimed carefully and fired back, hoping to slow them down. One hunter tripped a wire at the window. A shower of cans and bottles crashed down, buying Ethan a few seconds. Another tried to break down the door, but Ethan jammed it shut with a heavy pipe. Then the leader threw a grenade. It exploded with a blinding flash, filling the room with dust and smoke. Ethan coughed, eyes stinging, but he stayed close to Lyra. Suddenly, the floor cracked open. The crystal, glowing brighter than ever, sent out a wave of light. The hunters paused, confused. Lyra stood up, holding out her hands. The crystal's light flowed into her, and for a moment, she stood tall and strong, her wounds closing. Her eyes shining. She spoke in her own language, her voice echoing through the broken building. The hunters hesitated, afraid. Lyra stepped forward, the crystal's light swirling around her. Ethan saw his chance. He fired one last shot, driving the hunters back. Lyra raised her hand, and the ground shook, small stones flying into the air. The leader shouted in fear, and the hunters ran, leaving their weapons behind. As the dust settled, Lyra collapsed into Ethan's arms. The light faded, and silence returned. Ethan hugged her tightly, tears mixing with the dust on his face. Had survived. The hunters were gone for now. But the station was destroyed, and their journey was not over. Ethan looked at the rising sun, hope flickering in his heart. He had kept his promise. He and Lyra had faced their greatest danger, and won together. New beginnings. The sun was low in the sky as Ethan sat beside Lyra, both of them leaning against the broken wall of the ruined survey station. The ground was littered with shattered glass and twisted metal, but for the first time in days, the silence outside was peaceful. The hunters had vanished into the desert, leaving only their footprints behind. Ethan's arms were scratched and aching, but he didn't care. He watched Lyra, her eyes closed as she rested in the gentle light of evening. Her breathing was calm, and the strange glowing crystal rested safely in her lap. The terrible fear that had followed them for so long was finally gone. He looked around at the empty horizon. For the first time, he wondered what would happen next. The old shelter was gone, and the survey station was too broken to live in. But he didn't feel lost. In his heart, something new was growing, a feeling stronger than loneliness or fear. As the stars began to appear, Lyra opened her eyes and looked at Ethan. Her smile was soft, tired, but full of hope. She reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "Safe," she whispered, her English slow but sure. "Thanks to you." Ethan shook his head, smiling. "No, we did this together." They sat in silence for a while, just listening to the wind and the distant call of a night creature. Lyra traced a small circle in the sand with her finger, then pointed to the crystal. "Home," she said quietly. "This can call my people." Ethan's eyes widened. "You can go home?" Lyra nodded, her eyes shining. "Crystal is beacon. If I use, they find me. Long time I was afraid. Now not alone. Not afraid." For a moment, Ethan felt a strange mix of emotions. He was happy for Lyra, but the thought of losing his only friend in the universe made his chest hurt. He tried to hide it with a smile. "Then you should use it. They'll come for you." Lyra studied his face, understanding his sadness. She shook her head gently. "Not leave you here. You saved me. Now I help you." Ethan was surprised. You'd take me with you?" Lyra nodded. "Yes, you are my friend. My family." Now, it was the first time anyone had said those words to Ethan in years. His throat felt tight, and he tried to laugh, but his eyes stung with tears. He looked at the broken survey station, then at the endless desert, and finally at Lyra, his friend, his family. That night they prepared for the signal. Lyra showed Ethan how the crystal worked, placing it on a flat stone and pressing her hands to its sides. She spoke in her own language, her words flowing like music in the cool night air. The crystal began to glow, then pulse, sending a gentle beam of light up into the sky. It shimmered in all colors, bright and beautiful, reaching high above the clouds. Ethan watched, amazed. He realized he was witnessing something truly alien, something wonderful. They waited together, side by side, as the desert stretched into darkness. Hours passed. The stars wheeled overhead. For the first time, Ethan was not afraid of the future. Then, just before dawn, a new light appeared on the horizon, brighter and stranger than any star. It grew larger, then split into several shapes, gliding silently through the sky. Lyra's face lit up with hope. "My people," she whispered, standing and pulling Ethan to his feet. As the ships landed quietly on the sand, figures stepped out, tall, elegant beings with the same blue skin as Lyra. They moved carefully, respectfully, and spoke to Lyra in soft voices. When Lyra introduced Ethan, the aliens bowed to him in gratitude. One of the elders placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You save our daughter. You save her heart. You are welcome, always." Ethan felt a sense of belonging he had never known before. Lyra stood by his side, beaming with joy. She turned to Ethan and pressed the crystal into his hand. "Keep this. It is sign of trust. You are not alone." With Lyra and her people, Ethan left the desert behind. The ship rose silently, and for the first time, Ethan saw the world from above, the endless dunes, the shining sky, and a future full of hope. He had chosen to save a dying alien girl, and in the end, she had saved him too. Together, they set out for new worlds and new adventures, no longer strangers, but true friends, ready to face whatever the universe would bring.